to another episode of the Safety in Numbers podcast. This is episode 7, How to Talk with Angry Parents. I'm your hostess, Sheila Hansen. And honestly, this is also how to talk with angry people in general. So in episode 7, we're going to be covering some common mistakes, help you understand anger and how to diffuse emotions, how to speak with respect, and knowing your values and why. First of all, some common mistakes when dealing with angry people. Being easily offended. When your feelings are hurt, you do not respond well, instead you react. Responding means you think about the consequences of what you're saying, and reacting is where there's no thought, you are simply defending yourself, which always escalates the situation. Second mistake, telling parents how to parent. You may be thinking it, and sometimes you're right. But as soon as you say it, you insult that angry parent. And it becomes an insult on top of insult, and it's just rude. Third mistake is speaking in an accusatory language or tone, which is basically finger pointing with your words. When a person is angry, they have a heightened awareness of accusations. Things like, you did this or your child did that, will make them far more defensive. First step in knowing how to talk to somebody who's angry is understanding what anger actually is. Anger is an emotion that's meant to protect. So it's a secondary emotion that is there when people feel vulnerable and unsafe. And well, what are parents afraid of? Parents have a lot of fears when it comes to their kids. Many of you are parents as well, and think about it. What are your biggest fears when it comes to you as a parent? I am not a parent, but I asked many parents this question, and the overwhelming response was something along the lines of being afraid of ruining their child's life or their child's chances at a good life. And the second one was being thought of as a bad parent. When you know that, you see the parent differently. It does not excuse a parent's bad behavior. There was a school I worked at one time, and there was a couple of parents actually, for which we had restraining orders from the school on. They were not allowed on school properties because they had shown violence towards school staffs on many occasions. It does not excuse that behavior, but it does help you understand where it comes from. And when you understand where it comes from, sometimes you can adjust your approach, which most of the time can diffuse anger. Not always. I'm just telling you, these things worked for me probably 99% of the time. Realize that violence begets violence, and honestly, rudeness begets rudeness, and anger begets anger. In order to make real progress, you have to change your approach and realize that the parent is fighting for their kid, which means you got a mama bear there. And mama bears cannot reason with you. Mama bears react. Mama bears protect. They don't care who you are. If you are threatening their cub, they are going to attack you. So you have to lower the threat level in order to help them not feel so threatened and frightened and vulnerable before the situation can progress. Well, how do you diffuse their emotions? Well, honestly, you can't choose somebody else's emotion. They have to choose their emotion. But one of the things you can do to help them to choose a better emotion is to make them not feel so threatened. With anger, allow them to vent. Do not let it get under your skin, whatever it is that they're saying. Remember that they are feeling vulnerable and trying to protect their child. I wouldn't interrupt them if they are in the middle of a point, because what you're allowing them to do is basically release the pressure cooker. On the whole drive over to the school, or on the whole thing of picking up the phone, they were probably building up all of these scenarios in their mind and catastrophizing the situation and being ready to fight. You have to let them know that you are not attacking, so therefore there is no need to fight. Listen well and ask questions to be sure you understand their point. That does not mean you agree with it, but you understand it. I can understand why somebody might have an opposing point of view. Doesn't mean I have to agree with it, but I can understand it, and I can clearly state what their thoughts are, what their beliefs are. Be willing to admit that you were wrong or you misunderstood something. Be the first to apologize, only if it is warranted. If it isn't warranted, then don't ever apologize for something that you didn't do. But for instance, there was one time when I was entering grades quickly, and I accidentally put in a grade as an 18% instead of an 81. So a little transposition made an enormous difference in this kid's grade. the parent came to me extremely angry. They're like, why are you targeting my kid? And I was like, I'm not targeting your kid. Little Janie is super sweet and a very good kid. And she did well on the test. And they're like, your grade says they got an 18 on the test. And I was like, what? I looked and I was like, no, that was supposed to be an 81. I am so sorry. I transposed it. I immediately corrected it. That was my fault, not theirs. Should have they come at me the way they did? No, but they did. So I diffused it by simply correcting it and apologizing. Find some common ground. Something like, well, it's obvious that we both care very much what happens to your child and how your child performs. That is generally the most stable common ground that you can find, is that we both care what happens to this child. And when you have some common ground, they will possibly be able to hear what you're saying. Once you've diffused anger, underneath that anger, you have to diffuse the fear. And the way that you diffuse fear is through information, explaining your point of view, dispelling lies with gentle truth. Now, how you say it is key. And that's what we're going to talk about in the following slides. For instance, one time I was dealing with a student who had lied to his mom about an assignment that we had. And I don't remember the details because this was like 25 years ago. But I do remember that the mom came in and was like, well, why did you give little Johnny a late on the assignment when he turned it in the day after, like you said? And I looked at her and said, the assignment was actually due last week. And so he actually didn't turn it in the day after. He turned it in the week after. Well, then she turns and looks at her son, and the look in his eyes was like, and then the whole situation changed. She didn't feel like I was attacking her child anymore. Then she realized that her son had actually lied to protect himself, which that happens. We all do that. We did it as a child, and some of us still do it as adults. But when you dispel those lies, make sure you tell them the truth, but tell it to them gently and not accusatory. Now, how do you talk to parents? Speak with respect. Choose your words carefully when you're speaking to an angry parent or an angry person. Remember, Mama Bear doesn't hear well. You can only control your actions and describe things from your point of view. So that's where the I statements come in. And I statements are extremely effective because it's not accusatory and you are not telling somebody else about themselves. You are only telling them about yourself and your perspective. It's hard to argue with that. The second thing here is breathe. Take a deep breath, think, and respond to what they're saying and not react to what they're saying. So again, the response is where you've thought about it and you've considered options. Reaction is where you're simply defending yourself. See their strengths and know their fears. When you can see a parent's strengths, you begin to treat them with value. Whether that value and that respect is deserved or not, you begin to see them in a much higher light and less of an attacking force and more of a parent who's just lost or confused in how to best deal with their child. And then you have to change your language to calm the situation. So here are two options. One is the flaming option, which is probably going to escalate a situation into more anger. The second option is more likely to calm somebody when they are angry. Again, none of this is guaranteed, but you are more likely to be able to progress into a better situation. First option, Sam is being rude and disruptive in class. Now, this is what I'm saying to a parent, either on the phone or in an email or in a face-to-face interaction. The words are the same. Sam is being rude and disruptive in class. Well, a parent who is a mama bear type parent is going to simply hear that you are calling their child names, rude and disruptive. And they're going to start to want to protect their child. And then they're not going to want to hear or work with you. Option 2, here's a better way of saying the exact same thing. It's important for us to discuss the behavior that Sam is choosing. Now we're talking about behavior of Sam instead of calling Sam names. Now I realize that kids can be rude and disruptive, but calling that as a behavior that they're choosing rather than something that they identify as is totally different. Sam can choose to be rude and disruptive, but Sam can also choose not to be rude and disruptive. And when you voice it like that, then the parent is focusing more on Sam's behavior rather than somebody calling Sam names and instant judgment that comes with that. You said this. Well, they know what they said, whether they meant to say it or not. They already know what they said. So when you tell them what they said, you're basically between the lines is you think they're stupid. And if somebody thinks that you think they're stupid, then Mama Bear goes into effect and you have a fight on your hands. A better way of saying it is, what I heard, not what I heard you say, but what I heard was this. And then you ask the crucial question, is this correct? And what that does is it allows them to correct what I heard to what they actually meant. And it opens the door for discussion rather than closing it with, you said this, door close, end of statement. What I heard was this. Is that correct? So you're inviting them into the conversation. Similar with your child did this. It's better to say something like, I saw Sam throw paper wads and I heard him say this. So I'm telling them what I saw. I'm telling them about myself. Not about their son, I'm telling them about myself. It puts them in a different mindset. Another one, Sam is a bully and is causing some big problems. That's very similar to the first one. To some parents, it would feel like you are calling Sam names. And then they feel they have to defend their child. Option 2 would be to say, I'm concerned about Sam's behavior because his behavior is intimidating to others. Telling that parent that I'm concerned about their child, which I am. If I've seen many kids turn into bullies or be bullies. When you understand that, then you can address the behavior that Sam is doing and guide it in a different direction. And that's in a totally different video. But the way I say it to the parents is I'm concerned, because then the parent is like, well, I'm concerned about my child also. And then all of a sudden you're on common ground. Boom. Last one, I made the mistake of saying this to a parent one time, and that's why I put it in the presentation. Don't talk to me like that. Obviously, they were being rude and they were yelling at me and calling me names. But as soon as I said that, it was, game on. We're fighting. We're not getting around this issue. What I should have said, and what I have said in later conversations that also I was being yelled at or cussed at or something by a parent, is something along the lines of, I will continue this conversation when we are both calm. Can we try it again tomorrow? I am stating my boundary that I'm not going to let you talk to me like that, and that I want to talk about this situation about your child, but I'm not going to allow you to be verbally abusive to me. And if the situation continues, then you need to get your administration involved because one of your parents is behaving in a aggressive way towards a staff member, and that needs to be addressed by the administration also. If I say I'll continue this conversation when we are both calm, can we try again tomorrow? Most of the time, parents all of a sudden hear their words and they're like, oh, yes, can I come in and talk to you in person? And I'm happy to talk to them in person. If I don't feel safe, I will have another teacher in the room with me. Or perhaps we can meet in the office where there are other people around. But most of the time, if I felt safe, I would just have them into the room and we could sit down and talk. Last point on this is to know your values. Know why you do everything that you do. Because if you are unsure of your values and somebody questions them, then all of a sudden you become defensive. So know why you do what you do. Know why you grade things the way you do. Why you score things at the way you do. And if it's strictly out of laziness, sometimes you don't have anything to stand on. When I started doing this and I questioned why I did what I did, I changed a lot of the way I did things because I didn't have a reason for it. And it often caused problems. Once you know what you're going to do, then you are on solid ground with your values. And if somebody questions them, you can simply state reasons as to why you do what you do. It doesn't mean that they're going to agree with you, but you know why. Otherwise, it's like you're on a balance beam and somebody shoves you and you just fall off. Point 2, value what your students' parents think. Put yourself in their position. Ask them their opinion on some things. Like, if they come in and they're talking about a bad test score. Well, this is the study guide we used. This is how we did it. What are your thoughts on that? I like to end a lot of my emails with what are your thoughts, because that lets them know that I am open to discussing it. If it's something that I'm not open to discussing, like one of my values was that I don't do test retakes. A test is a chance for a student to show what they know. And if they fail that test, they don't get a second chance at it because they showed what they know. And they knew that going into the test. I never do that as a surprise. I tell them right off the bat, I never allow student retakes of tests. Then when the parent comes in and they're like, well, my kid failed the test. What are you going to do about it? And I say, well, here is the test review that we did. Here is the computer side review that we did. If a child felt that they weren't ready for the test, they could use their review on it. They lost the option of getting an A on the test if they used the review while on the test, but it was an option. And then most of the time when parents see all the resources their kid had going into the test, then they're like, oh yeah, totally. That's actually a great way to do it. And because I asked their opinion, then they understood, and knowledge is power. Last thing here is always start out the year by getting to know your parents. Don't let the first contact occur when the child makes a mistake. So I would always do an introduction email, and that would tell them about me and a little bit about my background and how I run my class. And then I would always ask them to reply to the email and introduce their child to me. That let them get a chance to brag on their child or tell me some things that they're concerned with that has happened in the past. I get to know the child really quickly that way. I get an email that I know the parents are checking every once in a while, so I can communicate with parents. So it just opens the door, and then you continually contact parents throughout the year. I would do a monthly newsletter letting them know what's coming up in our class. Or if we're getting ready to take a test, letting them know we're going to have a test next week on this day. I would send out a mass email to everybody on the email list through the computer, and that was a great resource when computers started doing the mass email option. Lastly, there are no guarantees. You cannot control people or the emotions that they choose, but how you respond can de-escalate the situation. You've heard you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. And then there's this parable. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's one of my favorites. It's the parable of the sun and the north wind. It's not a biblical parable, but it's along the same lines. So the north wind comes to the sun and says, I bet I can get that guy right down there to take his coat off before you can. The sun goes, all right, you're on. So the north wind gets his best stance and takes a deep breath and blows really, really hard. Well, the wind comes around and pulls the coat up, and the man feels the wind and gets cold and grabs the coat and pulls it on tight. And the wind goes, okay, I'm going to have to blow harder. So north wind takes another deep breath and blows, and the guy takes his coat and buttons it up tight and ties the sash and holds on to the collar. In that coat he stays, and the wind blew and blew and blew, and the guy simply held on tighter and tighter and tighter to his coat. So the sun steps in and says, wait, north wind, step aside. Take a breath. And the sun comes out from behind the clouds, shines brightly. The man in the coat starts to warm up, and pretty soon he's untying the sash and he's unbuttoning the coat. He's got his hands in his pockets. And then pretty soon he takes the coat off and dangles it over his arm. And it was no trouble for the sun. All the sun had to do was shine brightly. And the thing about that parable is it's completely true. If you show somebody that your way of doing things is better, then they can choose to come to your side. But trying to force someone to change their beliefs by yelling at them or ordering them around is never successful. They may end up doing what you want to do, but as soon as they get a chance, they're going to go back the other way because they were forced. They didn't have a choice. Using a calm and respectful approach can be hard because it can make you feel vulnerable. But controlling your anger is where your strength lies. Because when you remain in control of yourself, you remain in control of the situation. The last one here, rage and foul language is a lack of emotional control. Which lack of control is exactly what it says, and that's a weakness. And it is bad for your mental, emotional, and your physical health. Peaceful confrontations lead to a much more enjoyable day. You cannot ever avoid stress and conflict, but you can choose to let it make you a better teacher. So when you are able to work through conflicts, it makes you stronger. You understand how to deal with that situation better. You understand how not to deal with that situation. And the more you confront those things that are difficult, the better teacher you become. Thanks for joining me on today's Safety in Numbers podcast. Please join me in our next podcast, which is the opposite side of this topic. How does a parent approach a teacher when they see a problem in what their child is being asked to do at school? See you in the next episode.